to know how to live the way God intended? Then this podcast series is tailor-made for you. David Taviner asks Bible expert Mike Beaumont why Jesus spoke about living God's way using parables. And Mike will sum up what this means for us today in just 3 words.
This time we're back in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20 this time, for Jesus' parable of the workers in the vineyard. Set the scene for us, Mike, if you would, before we hear the parable.
Yeah, well, we discover in the beginning of the previous chapter, Matthew 19, that Jesus has now left Galilee for the last time. Now, much of what we've covered so far in our series has been set in Galilee, in the area around the Sea of Galilee. Occasionally he's come to the east side of that. Occasionally he's stretched up as far as Tyre and Sidon. But really, the vast majority of his ministry has been focused in Galilee. We do know that he used to go up to Jerusalem for the 3 great festivals of each year, and there were some clashes there with the religious leaders that John in particular highlights. But most of his ministry has focused around the ordinary people of Galilee. But in Matthew 19, there's a turning point, and he sets his heart to go towards Jerusalem for the final time, and all that he knows lies there ahead. But first, before he does that, he's resolved to spend some time preaching on the way. Now, Galilee is in the north, where the Sea of Galilee is. Judea is down in the south, where Jerusalem is. So he's going to start working his way down towards Jerusalem through Judea. In fact, Matthew tells us in 19 verse 1, he went into the region of Judea, so the south of the country, Judea, and to the other side of the Jordan. Now, that area was known as Perea, but Judea and Perea were the 2 political areas that were ruled by Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. So he's starting on that long journey towards the climax of his ministry. But he's resolved to preach to as many people as he can on the way. He wants to give as many people as possible the opportunity to hear his message. And as he goes and as he preaches, what do we come across? Well, the Pharisees, with their usual nitpicking attitude to his teaching and constantly trying to catch him out. And then at the end of chapter 19, there's an incident where a rich young man comes to him who really wants to be a follower of Jesus. But Jesus sort of exposes his heart by saying to him, well, yeah, you can come and follow me, but first go and sell everything that you have. And the guy's heart sinks. Now, it's not that we have to give away every penny we have to follow Jesus, but Jesus knew that the issue for this guy was money and his possessions. If you want to truly follow me, sell all your possessions, give to the poor, and come and follow me. And when the young man heard this, he went away sad. Why? Because he had great wealth. It was bigger to him. His money, his possessions, his stuff was bigger to him than Jesus.
And you can imagine Jesus' disciples thinking, well, Jesus seems to have turned him away.
Yeah, absolutely. Judas particularly would have been thinking, we let that one go, didn't we? But Jesus is going to use this as an opportunity to teach his disciples. He'll actually say to them, first of all, I tell you, yeah, it is hard for a rich person, a person with stuff, to enter the kingdom of God. Why? Because their stuff becomes the most important thing to them in life. Actually, it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven. What a ridiculous image there. This picture of trying to squeeze a camel through a needle's eye. It's deliberately funny. But then the disciples come back to him and it says they were greatly astonished and said, then who can be saved? So because in Jewish thinking at the time, if you were wealthy, that meant you were blessed. You had God's blessing. So hang on, Jesus. Whoa, wait a minute. If a man who was visibly, patently, obviously got the blessing of God on his life, as is evidenced by his possessions, and if he can't get into the kingdom of heaven, for goodness sake, who can? And Jesus says, with man, that's impossible, but with God, all things are possible. And Peter comes back and says, Lord, hang on, we've left everything to follow you. What is there going to be for us? Who on earth, Lord, can be saved? If they don't qualify, who does? If we've left everything, barely get in, who does? Now, what Jesus does is to use this as a teaching opportunity. And he's going to go on to teach a parable in which he shows that God's kingdom absolutely will come, but he adds a twist that when that kingdom comes in all its fullness, there'll be an awful lot of people there we weren't expecting.
Well, this is the parable that he teaches his disciples. Chapter 20 of Matthew's Gospel. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work in the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So, the last will be first, and the first will be last. Another twist from Jesus.
Oh, you bet. So many of his parables have a twist, don't they? You think you know where the story's going. You think you can outline it. What's happened? These guys have come. First one gets paid. Oh, we know what happened. Those who started earlier, they're going to get paid more, aren't they? Is where we would expect the story to go. And Jesus has this huge twist that almost makes it look unfair. But actually what he's trying to show us is this is not unfair. This is God being more than fair. That's what our God is like. God is like this landowner in the parable.
And yet again, Jesus starts by saying the kingdom of heaven is like. And it's the whole parable, is it? The whole picture?
Absolutely. It's not like one element of it. The kingdom of heaven is like, look, this scenario. And what scenario does he pick? Well, as we've got used to by now, a picture from ordinary, everyday life. It's the picture of a landowner going out looking for day labourers. Now, this is how most day labourers would have been hired in those days. Actually, it's still how day labourers are still hired in many parts of the third world and developing nations today. I've been in nations in Africa and in India where there are certain spots where people hang around from early morning waiting for businessmen to come by with their lorry or truck and saying, who wants to work for the day? And they've all lined up and he'll pick some for the day, and some get chosen and some get left. And their whole livelihood is dependent on their earning for that day. So this would have been something that everybody had seen and experienced. Guys hanging around in the marketplace, hoping, waiting that an owner would come by. Well, this owner in the story comes by. We're told that he goes out early. That would have been dawn, out at crack of dawn, and he goes to find out who's there. But the work that he's got done is great. It's huge. Hasn't got enough workers. So at 9 o'clock, you think, I need some more. So he goes out at 9 to find out who's gathered there now, and he collects them. And then again at 12, and then again at 3, and even again at 5 when there's only an hour left of the working day. And each time he's willing to take whoever's there.
And there's no wage negotiations, I noticed.
Oh, no. Everybody knew that the wage for a day's work was a denarius. There wasn't inflation in those days like today, so it was a denarius for decades. It had been generations. So everybody knew. You do the day's work, you're going to get paid a denarius. So at the end of the working day in the story, end of the working day would have been 6 p.m., he gathers them to pay their wages. Why? Because the law of Moses required that day laborers were paid at the end of each day and that you didn't hold on to their money, because literally they would then be taking that money to go and buy food for that day for their family. So what does he do in the story? He calls for those who were employed last to come forward. Remember, when did he call them? 5 o'clock. They've only been out there working in the fields for an hour, and everybody's standing around waiting. And you can imagine him saying, okay, so those of you who came at 5, if you come forward, please. Now, they would have expected to get a proportion of a denarius. They wouldn't have got a whole thing. But this guy digs into his bag and brings out a whole denarius. They've worked for 1 hour, but he gives them a whole day's pay. Now, use your imagination when reading these parables. Imagine how wide the eyes went of those guys who come and work 1 hour, but got a whole day's pay. It was like all their Christmases had come all at once, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Their eyes would have gone wide. But I'll tell you who else's eyes would have gone wide. The guys at the end of the line who started earlier in the day.
Hoping that perhaps there was an hourly rate. That was being introduced.
Absolutely. Maybe it was going to be a denarius an hour, but then he calls those who come at 5 and, hey, hang on, they got a denarius as well. Well, that's fine. It's only an hour's difference. And then those at 3 and at 12 and at 9, and those who'd been there since dawn, their eyes originally would have been wide with expectation, thinking, I wonder what we're going to get. And what they actually get is a denarius.
The same.
And they aren't well pleased. And they began to grumble against the landowner, we read in verse 11. And they start saying to him, it's not fair. Oh, that's a common phrase these days, isn't it? It's not fair. You've made them equal to us. We've worked since dawn and got a denarius. They've worked an hour and got a denarius. This isn't fair. And the landowner's reply is, whoa, hang on, guys. I'm not being unfair at all. I'm giving you what I promised. What did I say at the start of the day? What did we agree on? A denarius, a day's work for a day's pay. I've given you exactly what I agreed. Now, if I want to be generous with those who came later, that's up to me. I've got the right to do with my money whatever I want. And the issue here is not my unfairness, but your jealousy, your envy, the fact you cannot cope with my blessing someone, quotes, more than you think they ought to be blessed, more than they deserved, blessing them more than you because you had worked harder and longer. Listen, this doesn't say something about my heart. This says something about your heart.
So the reason why this story stirred them up and stirs us up as we're listening is because it goes completely against what we expect and what we're used to.
Yeah, it's not fair. It's not fair, is it? There ought to be a sliding scale. There ought to be an hourly rate. And there is something in all of us with this idea of fair. Of course, by fair, we mean what's right to me. It's not as though there was some, universal principle of fairness out there in the universe. It's not fair means I don't think it's right. I didn't get what I felt I expected. But what is Jesus trying to do here? He is trying to show not just his own disciples, but the Pharisees against whom this parable is told in particular. Their view of God is so small, so narrow. And he's trying to get them to see how big-hearted our God is. And of course, what he's thinking in practical terms is, the Jews have got a long history, went back all the way to Abraham when God started the story with the people. And they would say, yeah, but, we've been laboring here since Abraham's time, Lord, seeking to be faithful to you and to your word. And now you're bringing in all this scum and riffraff, Jewish scum and riffraff, but still scum and riffraff as far as they were concerned. And we haven't even got to Gentiles yet. And they're coming in last and getting the same blessing as us, getting salvation, just like us. Oh yeah, God says, that's how big my heart is. And if you can't see that, you've turned this into a transactional business between us rather than a living relationship.
One of the reasons Jesus told this parable is because of that question Peter asked, because he didn't seem to understand who was going to be allowed in to the kingdom.
Yes, and it's actually in direct response to that, isn't it? That at the end of chapter 19, when the Son of Man sits on his glorious kingdom, anyone who's left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children for me will find a place. And many who are first will be last, and many who were last will be first. Oh, hang on. That's how he ended the parable. It's what we call an inclusio, a story starting and ending with the same words or same idea to show that this is the important point here. And the Jews thought they had a special place because, they were first. They were the first to respond, so surely they should be up front in the procession. And Jesus turns this round and says, do you know what? At the end, it's going to be turned around. And many of those who think they should be up front will discover their way at the back of the queue because of their heart and their attitude or their rejection of me. And those who were humble and thought, Lord, I'm just so grateful to have sneaked in at the back, will find that they're invited way up front.
So at the core of it, as you said, it's not about unfairness, but it's about their envy. Now, just reflecting on that for a moment, how damaging can envy be?
Oh, hugely so. And as with pretty much all of these sins, as with unforgiveness that we've looked at in a previous episode, these sins don't do anything to the other person, but they are so destructive to me. If I get envious of you because you've had a pay rise and I've not had one this year, or, I've just seen you've got the latest car registration number plate on your car and I'm still driving my 15-year-old Ford. It's really easy to get into comparison and to start envying and being jealous. And the trouble is with envy, it can start out thinking, ooh, I wish that I had that. But it's a very easy step then to move from, ooh, I wish I had that, to, ooh, I wish you didn't have that. Ooh, actually, is there anything I can do to make sure you don't get that? So this is a sin and a disease that spreads. And the appeal of this parable, first and foremost to the Pharisees with their nitpicking lists and charts, but also to his own followers and disciples, is guys, girls, learn how to be big-hearted, because this is what your Heavenly Father is like. Remember how it started. The kingdom of heaven is like the whole parable. This is how life operates in God's kingdom. This is not just a parable of salvation about who gets saved first. This is a parable about how God's kingdom is meant to operate on an ongoing basis. And it's meant to operate on a basis of big-hearted generosity, wanting the best for people, rejoicing when they get more than they could have ever hoped for, rejoicing when, maybe we've been in our church for 40, 50 years slogging away faithfully, and then suddenly all these new folk come in and start coming in, and it feels like they're taking over. Praise God! They're coming in at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock on the working day, because this is the nature of the kingdom. This is the nature of God, to be big-hearted. And when we get envious, when we fall into comparison, which is the other thing, it reveals how very, very small-hearted we are.
Though this is known as the parable of the workers in the vineyard, it sounds like it really ought to be the parable of the landowner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's utterly incorrectly labelled in most Bibles. Now, remember, these headings are not in the Bible text. They're headings that Bible translators have put in over the years, and they're titles that have become very familiar. And most Bibles tend to keep the headings simply for consistency across. So the parable of the workers in the vineyard is its most common title. But actually, you see, the message is not about the workers. They're really quite secondary almost in the story. They're not at the heart of the action. Who's at the heart of the action? It's the landowner. It's God who's at the heart of the action. This is not a parable about the workers. This is a parable about the landowner, about his generosity, not their need. So personally, I prefer to call this parable the parable of the generous employer, because I think that switches it round and it helps us focus on what the heart of the parable is. It is not about their need. It is about his generosity. It's about his big-hearted generosity to want to bless people way beyond whatever they could deserve. That's the grace and favour of God, to go way beyond whatever we could deserve. If God dealt with us on a deserved basis, then we'd all be in trouble. But God's heart is to deal with us way beyond anything that we could ever deserve. And this parable shouts out loud, this parable of the generous employer shouts out loud with that message.
I suppose the word generosity so often is linked to money, to financial generosity. But there must be more than that. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a generosity of spirit. This is not just about money. Clearly, money's involved in the parable. He gives them a denarius at the end of the working day. But he gives the denarius out of a big-hearted, generous spirit that he is and that he has. And that's the sort of spirit that Jesus wants us to have. The very opposite, of course, to the Pharisees, to whom this is addressed, who are stingy, miserly, nitpicking, didn't want to give anything away beyond themselves. But if we're going to be a follower of Jesus, we have to resolve right at the beginning and continually throughout our life with him that what we are called to is a generosity of spirit, a big-heartedness in all that we are and do, with our money, with our time, with our patience, with our service, whatever it might be. We need to reflect our Father's heart, this heart of big-hearted generosity.
But can we have a spirit of generosity even if we haven't got very much?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's not about quantity, it's about quality. And it's about who we are rather than what we do or what we give. You may not have much money to give, for example, but you can give yourself. All of us can give ourselves. All of us can give a smile, a squeeze of a hand, a prayer with someone. So this is not about money. It's about a generosity of spirit. It is about an attitude that wants to give rather than take. Now, the Pharisees' attitude was they wanted to take rather than give. That was constantly their attitude. The religious leaders constantly wanted to take from people. But Jesus is calling us to an attitude that gives of ourselves and whatever we might have, because that's what our God is like.
How can we better understand the generosity of God?
Well, I think the short answer is by stepping out and giving it a go. I mean, first of all, how do we understand it? Well, by getting into Scripture, looking at Jesus. Look at Jesus, you're looking at God. So first of all, get into the Scriptures, look at Jesus, see the sort of person he was, tell God, I want to be more like that. And then secondly, by giving it a go and stepping out and discover that when we step out with God, he's always eager to rush towards us and to respond to even the very little thing that we bring to him. So dig down and step out, I would say.
Can I bring it back to the disciples' question, who after that rich young man went away, asked Jesus, who then can be saved?
Yeah, really, really good question. And Jesus' answer, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So what does that tell us? Hey, first of all, salvation is not about what we do. It's absolutely impossible. Who then can be saved? What can we? Well, actually, none of you. If you're trying to make it about you, what you've done, how good a person you are, how hard you've tried with the best will in the heart, that will never be a basis for salvation, because you will never reach the standard that God requires, which is a standard of absolute perfection. But Jesus says what's impossible with man is possible with God. God has the solution. God has the way of people being saved. And that comes out so clearly and repeatedly in the Gospels. How can we be saved? Maybe we're thinking, I feel a bit like one of those workers. I've left it late in life now, maybe literally or metaphorically. I've left it late. It's 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, even getting close to 6 o'clock. There can't be any hope for me now, surely, can there? Oh, yes. The message of this parable is that the generosity and the big heart of the generous employer stays open right until the very end. It is never too late with our generous God. And no matter how long you might have left it, no matter how long you might have put things off, what's impossible with man is possible with God. All you need to do is what the Gospels tell us to do. Come to Jesus. Come to Jesus and say, Jesus, I'm sorry. I know I've left this late, but I'm seeing I need you. I can't do this on my own. My life falls short of God and his standards. I fall short of my own standards, Lord, let alone his. Jesus, I repent. All that means is I turn away from all those efforts. I turn to you, and Jesus, I'm now going to put my trust in you and believe that you died on the cross to pay the price of my sins, and that what's impossible for me to do is possible for you to do. It is never too late. I want to say that to listeners today. It is never too late to come to Jesus. There's always room for one more. I used to visit India a lot during my years of traveling and ministry. And if ever you've travelled on an Indian train, and particularly a suburban train in Mumbai, they pack them in like sardines. The train gets full and then they add more.
No reserve seats.
No reserve seats, no reserve standing room. But no matter how packed it is, there's this sort of common saying there, There's always room for one more. And some might even climb up on the roof of the train. But there's always room for one more, no matter how packed those trains are in India. And somehow it always seems to manage, and people blend and meld, and you manage to get in, and you still somehow manage to get off at your station. Might be a bit battered and bruised, but you make it. There's always room for one more. Listen, God's kingdom is like that. That's the message of this parable. There's always room for one more. And if today your heart's stirring and you feel that you might be that one more, I'd encourage you to step out, to say yes to Jesus. If you need help, go to our website, ucb.co.uk/yes. There's a little help there for how you can get onto the train and how you yourself can discover the generosity of this wonderful employer in the parable. Our God is big-hearted, and he's big-hearted enough to welcome you. And his appeal to each one of us is to be just as big-hearted in welcoming others into his kingdom too.
Bible expert Mike Beaumont explaining the parables of Jesus to David Taviner. Bible Parables in 30 Minutes is just one of a series of podcasts from Mike and David that help to make sense of the Bible, some of them recorded on location in the Holy Land and beyond. You can check them all out on the easy-to-use app UCB Player or wherever you listen to your podcasts.